Sir.
I'm slightly confused by both presentations. Let me lay out my confusion. It strikes me that there are two sets of arguments that are being presented which strike me as inherently contradictory. The first one says, if this stuff has some kind of quote-unquote scientific validity, it's good. On the other hand, there is a cultural use of this stuff, whatever the stuff is, which is validity because it has cultural use. And it strikes me that, again, these arguments are kind of specious. Who cares if it's healthy, if it's culturally valid? Who cares if it's culturally valid, if it's healthy? One, the claim of health, leads me to the second set of basic confusions, which is the notion of the global versus the local. The global is a scientific claim. It should be banned because it is a bad thing. But it struck me in both of these presentations that the global in the 20th century has to do, for example, with the diaspora. We have this today. You obviously did not go to Ethiopia to buy your cot this morning. You went to the north end of London. So the question then of the global and the local, Bolivia should permit it because, in point of fact, it's culturally relevant in Bolivia. By the way, it's culturally relevant because it's quote-unquote healthy in Bolivia. These are contradictory comments. And you don't like international control because, in point of fact, it lumps cocaine and coca. It strikes me that one of the things people ought to figure out is whether or not they're going to make quote-unquote science claims or culture claims, and whether culture claims need be scientific. I can do stuff as part of my culture that are really bad for my health, but it's part of my culture. Do we want to talk about female genital mutilation? Okay? Perfectly good cultural relevant object, right? Nobody's going to like that stuff, okay? On the other hand, the notion of the global seems to me now a kind of odd. This is 1961, all these idiots get together, they have certain notions of what is addictive substances, and we are so much smarter than they were then because we're interested in the local rather than the global. I think these are things that for the next couple of days people ought to start to sort out rather than make assumptions about it.
Any responses to that?
A fascinating comment. I couldn't quite see a question in this. Good. The idea that there's a contradiction between the local and the global, or the idea of cultural relevance and scientific validity, that I think I would refute. Although I think you put your point on an underlying tension which you always have within that, not just the discourse on drugs, but in general, the idea of diversity versus universal values. That is a tension that is very difficult to reconcile. You brought up the example of female infibulation. That'd be a fine example. Would it be something that we would tolerate? But I think that when you're talking about the 1961 conventions, you have to also recognize the fact that much of the data, the evidence, the scientific evidence has since been overhauled and needs to be reviewed. And I think on that is perhaps something where we can agree upon that it is both for the global, for the scientific process itself, as well as for the cultural recognition of diversity.
Maybe just to add to this, the report, the ECOSOC report that has been the justification of the inclusion of the coca leaf in the conventions, is not not present as an illustration in the library of the WHO in Geneva. They don't have it. It's very hard to find, and we think, and I think most people who would read this report now, and you can, if you go to our website, you can read this report, would become red of shame to see on the basis of what kind of racial prejudice this report has been written. So you could say a bunch of idiots, and I think in a way it's true. I mean, there has been, and for no, it could never pass the scientific scrutiny of the 90 of this time now, this report. So Yeah, in a way, maybe. I mean, it's not to make them ridiculous, but it's just a fact that this report has no scientific value at all. Now, it has been even recognized by the WHO because they have not used and repeated when the coca leaf was proposed for review by the WHO in '92. It has not been repeated as an argument to keep the control on the coca leaf, but the argument of the easy extractability was used to maintain it in its current schedule. So, recognizing that the older arguments of the malnourishment and moral and physical decay that were the original reasons to include the coca leaf in the conventions, without any scientific support or research, has just been changed to another argument without any. So that's just unacceptable for serious policymakers and for serious scientific people.
Can I just have one statement? I mean, what you just said is fascinating, but it strikes me that therefore science is your bottom line and not culture. Because to be brutal about it, one could make an argument that I don't care whether or not this has negative, quote-unquote, health effects on the community, if the community has adopted this as part of its cultural practice.
Yeah. But I think that by prohibiting and banning the leaf, it has been the boundaries and the limits have been put upon a certain cultural use. I mean, you could argue that certain plants used by certain cultures have been able to expand and have been able to be used positively in other contexts, right? So I mean, without saying that we all need to go start chewing coca leaves, you could also say, well, it has been prohibited from '61 to go beyond this cultural context. There has not been enough scientific investigation to see the uses of these leaves for other public health purposes. So why don't we do that now? I mean, there's no real reason not to do it, I think.
Yes, I think, I'm not sure if I'm quoting accurately or not, but I think the report characterises coca chewing as associated with a lack of respect towards the superior race. I mean, I think it's not only the terminology that we wouldn't find today, but I think actually, you know, I think that's not a thought that we'd find in scientific assessments today in quite the same way. We've maybe got time for one more thought.
I think the cultural aspect that's fascinating, and we should definitely talk about them. But quite specifically, you did talk about a lot of health claims that are made for coca. And I just wondered, could you be clear? Are there any clinical studies that prove or disprove any of those?
Well, apart from the one I mentioned for altitude sickness and the glucose level, blood glucose level, that's quite well documented. But the rest is not seriously documented still. I mean, since the use of the flower is relatively new, there are some studies going on, but it's still not accepted by the academic community as a valid. I mean, it's not easy to do a serious research on a controlled substance, right? I mean, it's hard to get funds for that. So, but I would really all recommend to read this booklet. You can download, I have a few copies you can take, but you can also download it from our website, because there's also a chapter about coca nutrition. So what are the claims being made, and what is let's say the extremes of the malnourishment argument and the world wonder leaf that would cure all modern diseases. So we're sort of trying to establish the middle grounds and the grey, and what's known and what's not known. And you can either take a copy or download and read it. But the fact is that there's hardly any clinical research going on.
Thanks. I think we're technically speaking out of time and might have to continue this over coffee or tea, or indeed coca tea. So I'd just like to thank Pien and Axel for giving us so much to chew on in every respect. Thank you.